will be shared by Basil Keilani, who is the co-founder of Solidarity for Palestine Human Rights and an EFL instructor of Chosun University. Let's welcome our presenter, Basil Walid Keilani.
Yes, thank you for coming. Today's talk is going to focus on a few different things. It's going to focus on the image of Arab Americans. Well, first, who are Arab Americans? The image of Arab Americans. I'll look at some literature that I have to illustrate how Arab Americans really can be different, but they're not Arabic countries. And this country right here, Somalia, is a member of the Arab League. Like all those countries, including Somalia, but minus Ethiopia, Eritrea, are members of the Arab League. There are 22 Arab League states. Technically, Somalia is not an Arabic country, but it's a member of the Arab League. Okay? You can ask me that later. So, and most people of the Middle East have come from this area when they came to America. Mostly Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, and recently Iraq. And as you see, here's a map with the Ottoman Empire. Most people, Arabs, when they came to the United States and Canada and Brazil and other places, came when the Ottoman Empire was in existence. And they came from this part of the Ottoman Empire. And unfortunately, a lot of them were labeled as Turks when they weren't Turks. And many of them also were Christians. And sometimes, for example, a fight broke out between Irish Americans and Arab Americans in the East Coast. And we're going to attack those Turks. And then the priest had to say, look, they're not Turks. And they're actually Catholics like you. Stop fighting. Oh, sorry, Father, we didn't know. And that stopped the fighting. So it shows stereotypes feature in the beginning. And the Irish were stereotyped, and here they were stereotyping another people. Okay? And this shows you here the concentration of Arab Americans. Mostly a lot in the East Coast, as you can see, New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and a lot on the West Coast, California, and a huge amount in Michigan. Michigan probably has the largest number of Arab Americans. And a town near Dearborn is probably the majority Arab American. Now, this shows like many of the countries that have, sent Arab Americans. A lot from Lebanon. Lebanon has the largest group. And at that time, when Lebanon sent many immigrants, they were called Syrians, Lebanese Syrians. And a lot came from Syria as well. And a lot have been coming from Egypt lately, in the last 20, 30 years. A lot from Palestine because of the wars, especially like 1948, many refugees had to flee. And then 1967, Palestinians had to flee again. And then 1990, many Palestinians fled Kuwait. And here it talks about these stereotypes. For example, people were trying to say Obama is an Arab, but that's a misunderstanding of Arab because his father was a Kenyan, and there are no Arabs in Kenya. But because his grandfather converted to Islam, his grandfather was a Christian who became a Muslim, they made it as if religion was genetic, and they made him an Arab. Orientalism. If you're familiar with Dr. Edward Said, the late Dr. Edward Said, an Arab American, Anglo-Christian, Anglican, he wrote Orientalism, how people are stereotyped from different cultures. Then Jack Shaheen, he wrote Real Bad Arabs. Shows, he's an Arab American, shows how Arabs are stereotyped in movies and books, cartoons, and he documents all that. How Hollywood vilifies people. And here it shows like the evil Arab holding the gas can, right? Here talk shows something about Arab Americans. Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. Comes from Gibran Khalil Gibran, who wrote a book called The Prophet. Gibran was from Lebanon originally, Lebanese Maronite, but he was not religious. He was spiritual. He didn't trust organized religion. And then here it talks about the Arab American Institute. We Arab Americans are proud of our heritage and proud to be Americans. It is this pride that keeps us all asking what we can do for our country. Some people think that in America that most Arab Americans are not proud to be American. that might be a tiny minority. The majority of Arab Americans are very proud to be an American. They don't like some things that the American government maybe is doing, policies, but so do most Americans. All right, the religious makeup of Arab Americans. 42% of Arab Americans are Catholic. Okay. Now, the majority of Arabs in the Middle East are Muslim. Yes, 90% or so. But in America, 42% of them Catholic, 23% Greek Orthodox, Antiochian Orthodox, 23% Muslim, 12% Protestant from the British and American missionaries. All right, here's some famous Arab Americans with Nick Ray Hall. Okay. And I believe Nick Ray Hall was a West Virginian congressman. Okay. A high-ranking Freemason as well. Okay. And you got Ray LaHood, who's an American politician. Spencer Abraham with George Bush. He was in the cabinet. Donna Shalala. Donna Shalala was also a congresswoman, prominent Democrat. You got James Zogby. He's known for his Zogby polls. You've heard of the Zogby polls. You got Ralph Nader. He actually can speak a little bit Arabic, even though his family left a long time ago. You got Ralph Johns, civil rights. Okay. Thinkers. Gibran Khalil Gibran. Very good artist, thinker. He could speak French, English, Arabic, and even ancient Syriac. Edward Said, very good intellectual, one of the top intellectuals America's ever had. And then he recently died. He was a very strong critic of Israel. Okay, but he was also a literary critic. Okay, and Rashid Khalidi, who is very well known now. I don't want to use the word replace Edward Said. You can't really replace him. He has taken over the position that Edward Said has left behind. And we got sports. Doug Flutie. Okay. Bill George. Jim Herrick. Okay. Business. Paul Orfalia. Kinko's. And then Farouk Shami, known for his hair products. He tried to run for governor in Texas recently, but he didn't succeed. Music. Frank Zappa. He's part Arab. Okay. Casey Kasem. You've heard of Casey Kasem? Yes. Like the top 40. Paul Anka, singer. Sammy Hagar of Van Halen. In Arabic, that would be Sammy Hajjab. Okay. And then you got Emilio Estefan, married to Gloria Estefan, Cuban Lebanese. There are Lebanese Cubans. Okay. Joseph Aboud, fashion. You've probably seen Aboud, fashion. Naomi Shihab Naib, a very good poet. I actually met her late father, Aziz. Okay. Science. Hassan Kamal al-Sabah, there are more, of course. Now, here's some major events connected with Arab American immigration. Now, before 1860, there were a few Arab Americans who came. I think like North Africans, but I'd have to look more into that. And these are the waves. Okay, 1860, there were massacres. The British were allied to a Muslim sect called the Druze. The French were allied with the Catholic Christians. And then a fight broke out. The Christians were more, but they didn't have guns. Their priest told them to rebel without thinking that, well, maybe, Father, they don't have the guns. Don't make them rebel if they don't have the weapons. So the Maronites rebelled against the Druze, who were their lords. And then the Christians, many of them had to flee. Okay? Also, I didn't mention 1908, many Muslims and Christians were being pressed into the Turkish army, the Ottoman Empire. So many Muslims and Christians were leaving the region because they didn't want to serve. It meant death in Yemen or somewhere. There was a war in Yemen. They didn't want to die. Okay, in 1948, Palestinians started leaving. Refugees, 700,000 refugees had to leave Palestine. And in 1967, the Six-Day War. And then for Lebanese, again, 1975 to 1990, there was a civil war. Okay? A very bad civil war. Then 1991, Desert Storm. Lots of Iraqis and Palestinians were leaving. You had Palestinians in Kuwait and some Palestinians in Iraq leaving, and lots of Iraqis. Okay, let's go to some stories. Okay? We've got A New World. This is from an anthology called Dinar Zad's Children. There are different stories in the book, okay? We got by Susan Muaddi Darraj, A New World, okay? Nader is a Palestinian American of the Antiochian Orthodox community. Antioch is in Syria. There's a church called the Antiochian Orthodox. He works very hard to provide a good life for himself and his wife. Shows that many Arab Americans are very hardworking. Okay? He's got Siham, his wife. She's a traditional Palestinian from the old country who resists marrying Nader and then changes her mind. She's like, I don't know if I can trust an Arab American. Maybe you've developed untrustworthy values because many of the Palestinian Christian women are maybe more conservative, more old school. And she was wondering, maybe this Arab American, Palestinian American, I don't know if I can trust this guy. Who does he think he is? Oh, he's got money? Who cares? But eventually he keeps on talking to her dad, smooth talking her, and smooth talking. Okay, she decides to marry him. Okay? Now, George, Nader's friend from Palestine, okay, is another Palestinian American. His wife is Layla, Siham's friend. That's one character. So we got George, and this, okay, who is a friend of Nader. We got Siham, who is Nader's wife. Now, Layla is George's wife. The difference between Layla and Siham is Layla grew up in a refugee camp. As I told you, many Palestinians were refugees. So she's a little bit tougher, maybe, okay, than Siham. And one time there was like some tough work. But Layla is doing that hard work. Yeah, but she grew up in a refugee camp. Don't do this. Okay? Now there's the blonde woman, the American blonde woman. Who is she? This blonde woman keeps coming looking for Nader. She was married to Nader unbeknownst to his wife for the green card. Okay? But, some Arab Americans will marry for the green card, just like other nationalities. And then he goes and marries Siham, but he doesn't tell her. All right, let's see here. What can we look at here? Now, we dealt with maybe, let me talk about Arab Americans here. There's a lot of George and Nader, who are hardworking people, okay, represent how Arab Americans, in a sense, easily fit into the American framework because they're very mobile into society. And I would say the second generation of Arab Americans, maybe 80% of their children, marry non-Arabs. Their children often don't marry Arabs. Let's go to the next story. A Frame from the Sky by Randa Jarra. You're dealing with a Palestinian American father. He had to leave his home in the West Bank because of the 1967 war. Israel told many Palestinians from the West Bank, which is west of the Jordan River, if you are not in the West Bank during the war, you have lost your residency. You cannot return to the city of your birth. That actually happened to my father. He was studying in the United States. He was told by, all of you outside cannot return. Okay? This happened to him. So he was a refugee in 1967. He couldn't return to his home. And then 1990, when Kuwait kicked out many Palestinians, he couldn't return to Kuwait to his job. Okay. Now the son, the man's Palestinian American son, is essentially an assimilated second generation kind of person. He can't completely relate to his father. Really, Dad? That happened to you? That sucks. And then his father's like, what is this suck word? I don't understand. Okay? Okay, chain of events. His first field for dislocation was in 1967, during the Six-Day War, when Israel was in a war with Egypt, Syria, and Jordan. Okay? Then in 1991, he was in the U.S. waiting for Kuwait, his place of residence, to be liberated. But he couldn't return when it was liberated. His boss apologizes, telling him he can't return because Arafat, was friendly with Saddam. He settles permanently in the U.S. and gets a job with an American firm. The man feels ambivalent about becoming an American. He's like, I don't know how I feel about being an American. Not because he didn't like Americans, he wasn't even religious also. Because he didn't like American policies regarding Palestine, his people, and how his people were treated by America. Okay? But he decides he was going to become an American. And he became an American. First thing he does when he gets, becomes a citizen, he goes and visits his mother's grave. Okay? In Palestine. Okay? One last thing, we got Evelyn Sha appears, Lebanon. We've got a Lebanese girl who's half British, half a Muslim father, Lebanese father, ends up dating different boyfriends. She's trying to find her identity, rebelling in certain ways, dealing with a Lebanese civil war. Eventually, she meets a Lebanese American Christian who wants to discover his roots through her. So we got Old Lebanon by Evelyn Sha here. She recently passed away in 2010. She was one of the pioneers for a lot of American studies. We've got a Lebanese American woman from a liberal Muslim family. She's also British through her mother. She has an English mother. She marries a Jamaican. She finds it doesn't work for her. She leaves Jamaica. Okay? Part of the reason was the violence. She was afraid of the violence there. She didn't want to leave the violence of Lebanon to deal with the violence of Jamaica. Okay? And a Lebanese, with another character, is a Lebanese Maronite. Maronite means Catholic Lebanese, whose family came to America long ago, seeking to recover his roots through a Lebanese woman. Okay. She longs to get out of Lebanon. Many Lebanese felt trapped during the Civil War. They couldn't often leave their homes. There were bombings, shellings. People could get shot going to the grocery store. One of my friends, his father died going to get groceries for his kids. Okay? It was very bad in Lebanon during the Civil War. Okay, in contrast to what's expected from tradition, she marries 3 non-Arab, non-Lebanese husbands, and who are non-Muslim. Okay? After 3 unsuccessful marriages, she tries to find a man through an agency, dating agency, that her parents would approve of. She wants to straighten out her life. As a result, she meets a Lebanese Maronite, Catholic, who goes out of his way to romance her. Sorry. Oh, but I would learn Arabic. And if I marry you, will you teach our kids Arabic? So he wants to really discover his origins and his roots through her. And initially, she's put off by that. But then she sees that he's a nice man, he's charming. She decides to give him a chance. All right. And I think I'm finished with my talk. Yes. Thank you.